Hello and welcome. It is an honor to see all respected speakers and participants of the Plenary of Peace and Security, Situation and What Needs to be Done today. I'm Cuong from the Vietnam Peace and Development Foundation, and Katerina Anastasius from Transform will be my co-moderator for the session today. Dear friends, first of all, I'd like to convey my deepest grief, condolences, and sharing towards all victims of COVID-19 in the world. And on behalf of the AEPF Peace and Security Cluster, we would like to request an immediate end to attacks on normal people in Myanmar and Gaza. I'd like to express our appreciation to our respected speaker, Noam Chomsky, who has kindly prepared and sent a video clip to our plenary. Dr. Walden Bello, Professor Lo Kinchi, Tarja, Cronberg, MEP Helmut, Dr. Nguyen Bich Ngoc, and Professor Chenoy. Friends, as we can see, big efforts have been made by peace movement and people organizations over the world since AEPF 12 in Belgium, and there have been signs of positive changes with the entry into force of the PPNW and some positive signs in the Korean Peninsula in 2018 and 2019. But it is not that good. Increasing major power competition leading to arms races, increasing military spending, deteriorating relations, and increasing tension between China and India, India and Pakistan, Israel and Palestine, the crisis in Myanmar, maritime dispute in the East China Sea and South China Sea caused by China's claim to 80% of the sea, the worsening civil war situation in West Asia, economic neoliberalism and climate crisis. Vaccine monopoly have made the overall peace and security situation in Eurasia deteriorate for the past 3 years. Being aware of the current situation, our plenary today will focus on the analysis of the peace and security in Asia and Europe and recommend what needs to be done, with hopes to contribute to building a world of peace for human security. We will be hearing 7 distinguished speakers. If you have any comments or questions at any time, you can please make it via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please do not make your comment and question in the chat box because your question may get lost as people say hello, nice, etc. So please make it via the Q&A button. We will monitor the comments and select a range from them that the speaker can engage with. Even if we are not being able to respond to all questions or comments that you have made due to time constraint, we are still encouraging and highly appreciate your interaction and engagement. Throughout the session, we will be sharing links to resources and further reading in the chat box, and you can also engage there. But be aware that the question in the chat may be answered by other participants rather than the speaker. Now, to start the session, I would like to give the floor to my respected co-moderator, Katerina Anastasius. Katerina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Cuong. Thank you also to the IAPF for organizing this very, very important and timely conference. My name is Katerina Anastasiou. I have the honor to co-moderate this today with Cuong. And my first task will be to introduce to you the first video clip, the first intervention we have from Professor Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is one of the leading intellectuals of the 20th and 21st century. He is also one of the most influential academics. He's a linguist, a philosopher, and historian from the US. He's also a major figure in analytical philosophy, and he has written over 150 books on linguistics, war, mass media, politics. Ideologically, he aligns with anarcho-syndicalism and libertarian socialism, but he has been also a peace activist for all his life. It is an honor to host his words today, and I would like to pass so to say, the ball to our dear technical moderator that will play now his message for you.
Discussing peace and security in the world, there are a few propositions that are utterly clear and beyond controversy and debate. One is that there cannot be a conflict between nuclear powers. Conflicts among other powers are disasters. A conflict between nuclear powers is cataclysmic. In the case of major nuclear powers, like the US and China, it's the end. There will be nothing left to discuss. For this reason alone, the plans and programs of the major powers verge on insanity. The United States is far in the lead in military planning, military power. Its military spending is about 40% of the immense total global spending. Far behind in second place is China with about 14%. Russian military spending is a fraction of that, actually less than India's. All are far above what they should be, and worse, are increasing. The United States is also far ahead in military technology, is now leading the way to expanding the arms race into space, gravely increasing the severe, growing threat of war. Its current military strategy is to prepare for war with both major nuclear states, China and Russia. War with either is the end of viable life on Earth. Though far behind, China and Russia are also expanding their arsenals with dangerous weapons, as are lesser states. So Britain, unable to shake off dreams of past glory, or realistically past infamy, has just announced that it's upgrading its nuclear facilities, whose only function is to make Britain a target if war threatens. It's utter lunacy all around, not least because of what is stolen from the general population of the world, all with desperate needs. Against this background, let's think again about the first proposition: there cannot be a war between nuclear powers. That has an immediate corollary. There cannot be provocations among nuclear powers. These can easily get out of hand, even by accident and miscomprehension. There are all too many cases. I'll take just one. When Ronald Reagan took office, his administration decided to probe Russian defenses by simulating a general attack on Russia, including a nuclear attack. Happened to be at a moment of considerable tension. The assumption of US planners was that the Russian leadership would understand that this was just a test. Well, Russian archives have now been released. Turns out, not too surprisingly, that the Russian leadership was deeply concerned. Both sides have automated systems to detect possible attacks. We have records from the United States. There have been innumerable errors corrected by human intervention, sometimes at almost the last minute. The Russian systems are much more primitive, prone to error. At one point during the simulated US attack, the Russian systems signaled that a US missile attack was underway. The officer who was monitoring the computers, Vladimir Petrov, thought it was probably a false alarm, and he decided to violate protocol and not inform the top leadership. He was reprimanded, and we are alive, thanks to his refusal to follow orders. It's not the only case, not even the most dangerous one. So to return to lesson number 2, there cannot be provocations among nuclear powers. They can all too easily spiral out of control, in which case the game is over. That has corollaries too. There are controversies in many places. One is about the South China Sea. There cannot be provocative acts there, like sending a naval armada into the South China Sea, as the US is doing right now, while Chinese bombers fly near Taiwan. Doesn't take much imagination to think of what might happen. In brief, there cannot be confrontations among nuclear powers. There cannot be provocations either. Nor can there be provocations that are less than terminal in their immediate implications. Take Iran. There was a treaty that was dealing effectively with the alleged threat of Iranian nuclear weapons. I stress the word alleged. The Trump administration pulled out, dismantling the treaty in violation of Security Council orders and imposed murderous sanctions, third-party sanctions. Others must observe them on pain of being expelled from the international financial system, which is run from Washington and New York. President Biden has so far adopted Trump's policy, maintaining the sanctions, refusing to return to the agreement that the US had dismantled, insisting on a harsher one. Israel is quite openly attacking Iran, which so far has not responded with dangerous acts. It might, which might in turn lead to escalation of US-Israeli attacks on Iran. Iran has the capacity to destroy the world's major oil-producing facilities right near its border in northeast Saudi Arabia. Might do so, might even threaten to do so, in which case, again, the gloves are off with potential consequences that no sane person wants to think about. The world is a powder keg, ready to explode terminally, which leads us to the last lesson, the most important one. Every one of these and other major crises can be resolved peacefully by diplomacy and negotiations, by goodwill, and by recognition of a fundamental principle of world order. That principle is that we are all in this together, sink or swim. The world is facing challenges that have never arisen in human history: environmental destruction, nuclear war, new, still more lethal pandemics. All the challenges we face are international. We will either face them together in a spirit of cooperation and mutual support, or the human experiment will come to an inglorious end. It's as simple as that.
Thank you very much to the technical moderator. Very strong words. I will yet proceed in introducing the next speaker, and after the 7 speakers are done, we're gonna take questions by the audience and then discuss a little bit more. So now I have the honor to introduce Walden Bello. Dr. Walden Bello from the Philippines is the chairperson of Laban Masa. He's an academic, environmentalist, social worker who served as a member of the House of Representatives of the Philippines. He's also the founder of a Focus on the Global South and the recipient of the Right Livelihood Award. Dr. Walden Bello, please, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, Alessandra. Let me coordinate here with Kathy. Kathy, can you? Okay, great. Excellent. Let me see. Okay, that's fine. So it was great to listen to Noam Chomsky, and let me follow up with one of the areas that he talked about, which is the Asia Pacific as a global hotspot. So next slide, please. Now, during the long Cold War period from 1948 to 1991, one of the big ironies was that the superpowers prepared for war in Europe, but it was in the Asia Pacific that the hot wars actually broke out. With two major conflicts, first the Korean War, where the combined forces of the DPRK and the PRC fought the United States to a stalemate in 1950 to 53. And second, the long war of national liberation in Vietnam from 45 to 73, where the Vietnamese defeated first the French, then the Americans. The big question in the minds of many today is, will the Asia Pacific be the site of another major confrontation in what is now being called the New Cold War? Next slide, please. There is a book published 4 years ago by the so-called Dean of Strategic Studies in the United States, Graham Allison, titled Destined for War, Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap? The aim of the book, published in 2017, is supposedly how to prevent the US and China from going to war with each other. But if you read the book closely, you will realize that the subtext is actually how the United States should go about containing China by political and military means. Allison was writing about US strategic policy in the pre-Trump period. And here he wrote, and I quote, American policy essentially seeks to cling to the status quo, the Pax Americana established after World War II. But that status quo cannot be sustained when the underlying balance of power has tilted so dramatically in China's favor, unquote. American policymakers, he says, should stop fooling themselves. They have to work out a geopolitical strategy that reflects the fact that, quote, China's emergence as the #1 power in Asia and its aspiration to be #1 in the world reflects not just the imperative of economic growth, but also a supremacist worldview bound up with Chinese identity, unquote. Slide, please. I don't know whether Trump read Allison or had someone read him Allison, but he took his advice and, with the help of his China-hating economic advisor, Peter Navarro, reoriented American policy towards an aggressive posture towards Beijing on the geo-economic front. Now, most indications are that the Biden team are not going to return to the Clinton, Bush II, Obama policy of accommodating China, but to extend Trump's policy to the geopolitical front. And no one is more happy than Washington's national security establishment, of whom Allison is the key representative, who have long criticized how the interests of the US transnational corporations have been the driving force of US policy towards China since the Clinton period. Slide, please. Now, whatever may be their strategic motives, Allison and his school are right about one thing. China is on its way to becoming #1 when it comes to the global economy. China may still be #2, but even now, it is the center of global capital accumulation. At the beginning of the third decade of the 21st century, China was not only the world's second biggest economy, it had become the center of global capital accumulation, or in the popular image, the locomotive of the world economy. accounting for 28% of all growth worldwide in the 5 years from 2013 to 2018, more than twice the share of the United States, according to the International Monetary Fund. Next slide, please. I will not go into the reasons why China has risen so rapidly from being an outcast of the world economy to being near its very top in just 30 years. All I can say here are two things. One, despite its undoubtedly high cost, the Chinese leadership since the 1990s entered into what we might term a devil's bargain with American transnational corporations. In return for the super exploitation of its labor force, it sought to gain foreign investment, foreign markets, and technology transfers to comprehensively develop China's economy. Slide, please. The second point is that, as the Chinese had expected and demanded, US TNCs in search of super profits from exploiting a labor force whose average wages were 2.9% of US manufacturing wages, transferred a massive portion of US industrial processes and significant industrial technologies to China. China's rapid industrialization was accompanied by rapid US deindustrialization. Long before the banking collapse of 2008, key US industries such as machine tools, consumer electronics, auto parts, appliances, furniture, et cetera, that once dominated the global marketplace suffered their own economic collapse. While not all moved to China, moving to China was a central factor in deindustrialization. The China shock is estimated conservatively to have led to a loss of 2.4 million American jobs. Most likely the number of jobs lost was much higher. Slide, please. Rise of inequality in the United States, to which deindustrialization was a central contributor, owing to the loss of well-paid manufacturing jobs. But this was not the only reason, and one must see the rise in inequality as a product of neoliberal policies as a whole. And I just want to quote the French economist Thomas Piketty. I want to stress that the word collapse in the case of the US is no exaggeration. The bottom 50% of the income distribution claimed around 20% of national income from 1950 to 1980, but that share has been divided almost in half, falling to just 12% in 2010-2015. The top centile share has moved in the opposite direction from barely 11% to more than 20%, unquote. Next slide, please. Now, this economic crisis has been also accompanied by a political crisis. An undeclared civil war has severely damaged US political system as the majority population, that is the white population, embraces white supremacy. And also an ideological crisis. There is the loss of the American dream, as the idea that so long as you work hard, you can go up. And the United States, there is no longer a strong interest in providing ideological leadership to the world. There is a turning inward, although the left and the right differ on how the US can be fixed. Slide, please. Next slide, please. While in China, unlike in the US, China, though it's had tensions associated with breakneck industrialization, was not suffering from political polarization. The partisans of Western-style democracy were a very small minority, though spontaneous feelings of alienation against the authorities were widely expressed on the internet. And we've experienced Xi's ideological renovation campaign, which is composed of anti-corruption campaign, the so-called Chinese dream of shared prosperity, and national rejuvenation. And there has also been a push for global leadership of the globalization process through the idea of connectivity, which is best represented by the Belt and Road Initiative. Next slide, please. Now, with the US suffering from a prolonged economic crisis owing to deindustrialization and financialization, and from an undeclared social and political civil war that is bringing everything into gridlock, the only area where the United States enjoys undisputed superiority over China is on the strategic front. I would strongly contend that the conjunction of the loss of global economic hegemony, debilitating political and ideological crisis, and massive military superiority is a very dangerous one. The danger comes not from the fact that China is modernizing its military, as the US Defense Department claims, but that China is so far behind militarily. Let me explain. Slide, please. Next slide, please. In his speech at the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China on October 18, 2017, the famous Chinese Dream speech, Xi Jinping laid out a three-stage schedule for China's military modernization, ending at mid-century with the achievement of the military into a world-class force that could manage crisis and deter and win wars. One can read that assertion as Xi's admission that the People's Liberation Army was some 30 years behind the US military. They universally regarded as the world-class standard. In my view, it was a mistake to admit this, and I shall explain why after we have compared the military capabilities of the US and China. Slide, please. So how do the United States and China's armed forces compared today? Okay, in 2019, US military expenditures were about 3 times more than China's. The rise in military spending by the US was 5.3% from its level in 2019, while that of China was 5.1%. Slide, please. US officials now routinely describe China as a near-peer competitor. This is grossly inaccurate if we use non-partisan indicators. First of all, in terms of nuclear weapons, Beijing has a relatively small nuclear force that is guided by a no-first-use doctrine, focusing on deterring a potential aggressor via the maintenance of second-strike retaliatory capability. The US has a vastly superior nuclear capabilities, and it has not adopted a no-first-use position. Now, China has only about 250 nuclear warheads, while at the end of 2017, the US nuclear arsenal contained approximately just under 1,400 deployed and approximately 4,000 stockpiled warheads. Next, please. Second, China's conventional offensive capabilities are grossly inferior to that of the United States. 2 key indicators of a country's offensive capability are its overseas bases and its aircraft carriers. China has only 1 overseas military base, and that is located in Djibouti off the Gulf of Aden, from which it participates in anti-piracy activities. The US, on the other hand, has scores of military bases surrounding China, 25 major bases and 60 other facilities spread all over Japan, 15 bases in South Korea, 3 bases in Guam, and 5 bases in the Philippines. In terms of aircraft carriers, China has 2 operational carriers with an antiquated Soviet-era design, while the US has 11 carrier task forces, one of them the 7th Fleet based on Yokosuka, Japan, which can easily be supplemented by another carrier task force from the Eastern Pacific in the event of conflict. US carriers like the recently commissioned USS Gerald Ford are the state of the art, far in advance of anything China has to offer. Slide, please. Even the Pentagon does not dispute Beijing's strategic posture as strategic defense, which is, quote, rooted in a commitment not to initiate armed conflict, but to respond robustly if an adversary challenges China's national unity, territorial sovereignty, or interests, and quote. Slide, please. The US strategic posture, on the other hand, is offensive. It has 3 key components. One is forward deployment, that is to push the presence of US military power as far as possible from the territorial limits of the US and as near as possible to the borders of a likely enemy. Second is a warfighting strategy called Air-Sea Doctrine. And a key document explicitly points to China as the enemy and calls for kinetic and non-kinetic strikes against inland command centers, radar systems, and intelligence gathering facilities, raids against missile production and storage operations, and blinding operations against Chinese satellites. It also says that China's seaborne trade flows would be cut off, with an eye towards exerting major stress on the Chinese economy and eventually internal stress, unquote. Slide, please. Third, the US long-term strategic perspective is overmatched. According to noted defense analyst Mike Clare, and I quote, although reminiscent of containment in some respects, overmatch differs from Cold War strategy, not only because it presumes 2 and possibly more competitors instead of just 1, but also because it requires a perpetual struggle for dominance in every realm, including in trade, energy, and technology. Next slide, please. China's strategic dilemma is that large parts of the US military forces in the Western Pacific lie right on its doorstep, entrenched in bases on the so-called First Island chain, or at sea in the forward deployed US 7th Fleet. Most of China's industrial infrastructure and population are located in the country's southeastern and eastern coasts, and thus are very vulnerable to US power in the event of conflict. Slide, please. China's response to this dilemma has been to push its defenses outwards, placing anti-access, anti-denial weapons, A2AD, in maritime formations like Mischief Reef that it seized in the South China Sea from countries like the Philippines. And these moves have been justified unilaterally by saying that 90% of the South China Sea belong to China. China's claim to 90% of the South China Sea is illegal and violates the rights of 5 other countries that border that body of water. The US has long seen the South China Sea as part of an American lake, and its surface ships and submarines patrol the area with impunity up to just outside China's 12-mile territorial waters, while its intelligence-gathering aircraft also lurk as close as possible, surveying every square meter of ocean and coast. While China advances territorial claims, the US advances the doctrine of freedom of navigation to advance its military interests, unquote. Here. Be that as may, US-China jockeying for power in the South China Sea is creating a very explosive situation. Since there are no rules of the game except an informal balance of power, and resorting to balance of power as a regulator of conflict is quite unreliable, as was seen in the case of the European balance of power that resulted in the First World War. Right now, US and Chinese ships are engaged in provocative games of chicken, in which jet fighters buzz enemy ships or warships, head for their rivals, then swerve at the last minute. When I visited Vietnam as a member of Congress in 2014, Vietnamese officials, as Cuong knows, expressed to me how a mere ship collision could escalate into a bigger conflict. And I have no doubt they are right, since both China and the US are viewing their maneuvers in the West Philippine Sea within a larger regional and global chessboard. Slide, please. Slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea could be the match for a much bigger confrontation. In my writings, I have put forward a 4-step plan under the auspices of ASEAN towards the de-escalation of conflict in the area. The main steps of which are, first, an agreement among all parties to adopt a code of conduct of their civilian and military contingents in the area. Second, an agreement to demilitarize and denuclearize the area, the key element of which would be closing down US bases in the Philippines, and China withdrawing its forces and military equipment from maritime formations it has seized from the Philippines and other ASEAN countries. And third, an agreement for joint development of the common space of the South China Sea based on respect for countries' exclusive economic zones and continental shelves. Next, please. The South China Sea, West Philippine Sea situation is extremely important to address because it is the best candidate to serve as the place where events might ignite a bigger conflict that has to do with a broader historic hegemonic transition that is taking place. Let me explain. Clausewitz famously wrote that, quote, war is the extension of politics by other means, unquote. This gives too much weight to rational calculus as the process of determining when to go to war. It grossly underestimates the role of passion. But what is truly dangerous is when passion is joined to rational calculus, such as when the desire to maintain hegemony is attached to a calculable process of when to go to war. Xi Jinping's estimate at the 19th Party Congress that it will be in mid-century that China will have the world-class forces that can match those of the United States has perhaps unwittingly given the Pentagon a sense that it has at most a 30-year window of opportunity, and most likely less, to do something. That is what I meant about Xi's making a mistake in his 19th Party Congress. Will the Pentagon really allow Beijing to achieve strategic equality, which may well be the last step to America's loss of global hegemony? Next slide, please. Next slide. Am I exaggerating? This is the second to the last slide. The US is probably the most warlike country over the last 245 years, constantly expanding and taking over territory through its military adventures in its first 150 years, then using military force to achieve and maintain military hegemony for the next 100 years. There have been few periods where this country has not been at war. The US has been continuously at war over the last 20 years, since 2001. Compare this to China, which last deployed troops outside its borders 40 years ago when it said it would teach Vietnam a lesson. Indeed, the big fear of the Chinese is that their forces do not have the experience of war fighting that the US has, which would be decisive in any conflict. Finally, slide. Let me end by circling back to Graham Allison, the Dean of the Security Studies Establishment in the United States, who says that China and the US are on a collision course for war. To many, including myself, preemptive move on the part of the United States, given its bellicose history, is a given. The question is not whether, but when, where, and how this will take place. And finally, slide please. This presentation is based on my piece titled At the Summit of Global Capitalism, Accommodation, Rivalry, or Confrontation Between the US and China, that will appear in Socialist Register 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Walden. Just a reminder to everyone, we're quite tight in the time schedule. So while Walden was speaking, I made this. And for the future speakers, when I show you this, just mind your time, okay? When you see the clock. Now I have the honor to introduce the next speaker, Professor Lau Kim Chi from Hong Kong, from the Lingnam University. Her areas of interest are translation and cultural studies, gender studies, contemporary China studies, and comparative literature. Professor Lau Kim Chi, you're welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thanks to the panel organizers for inviting me to this session. Probably most people in progressive NGO communities see the USA as the main culprit, destabilizing the world order with its threats of military power and its hegemonic command in financial capitalism, such as its easing itself with huge quantities of US dollars to save its own economy while externalizing the costs to the whole world, especially to the periphery countries. The USA is the key factor fueling and aggravating the insecurity and violence in Asia, Europe, and the whole world. I think this understanding is shared by many of us. However, there are differences in terms of who are the enemies and allies at the state level, who are the second or third evils after the USA, and whether the enemy's enemy is an ally or they could also be enemies. The third world's concept, the three worlds concept coined by the United Nations in 1945 defined countries by their economic wealth and level of industrialization. In Mao Zedong's times, his three worlds theory put the United States and the Soviet Union into the first world, designating them as superpowers in imperialism and social imperialism. Europe, etc., were in the second world, and China and the non-aligned countries were in the third world. With China's so-called economic rise, and also with the consistent and persistent demonization by the United States and its allies, some in the NGO communities would be using a similar first world, third world formula, this time replacing the Soviet Union with China, seeing the United States and China as superpowers threatening to dominate the world. However, according to Samir Amin, up until his death 3 years ago, he insisted that the three oligarchic powers are the United States, Europe, and Japan, and they are the serious threats to people's security and peace in the periphery and semi-periphery. I subscribe to Samir Amin's position, but I will not go into the arguments. I just want to note that different analysis would lead to different proposals and emphasis for peace and security. I would like to focus on the second part in the title, what needs to be done. We can only be forced into depression and passivity if we look at the immense suffering and injustice around us. When we ask the question, what needs to be done, we are also asking the question, who is the agent of action? I remember an oil multinational corporation advertising on its environmental damage and oil leak. It said, "We are not the problem, we are the solution." Some of us can at once see the hypocrisy in this slogan. Yet, how often have we been also trapped in the logic of identifying the power centers as the problem, yet also handing over the capacity of remedial action to them, thus assigning them the position for solutions. Indeed, the states and the multinational corporations and the minority of elites should not be let off the hook for their responsibilities, and they should be pressurized for change. But, and this is a big but, how can we as the 90%, the overwhelming majority, not just call upon or pray that the power centers will change their policies with sudden benevolence? And as the Buddhist saying goes, a butcher can become a Buddha once he drops the weapons of murder and war. How can we be master of our own lives, even if this saying has somehow been dropped from alternative discourse for quite some time? Given the time constraint, I would like to propose some strategies for action. First, follow the money. Many regions are conflict zones because they have mineral or soil or oil resources. If we list countries where the United States has waged a war or has planned for one, whether it is Libya or Iraq, Iran or Venezuela, we can see the demagogy of so-called mission for democracy, which is another version of the white man's burden. There is also the question of finance capitalism. Michael Hudson, in his new book, which is to come out in a month, entitled The Destiny of Civilization, Finance Capitalism, Industrial Capitalism, or Socialism, which is a brilliant analysis of US imperialism with its financial and military interests, terms finance capitalism democratic imperialism. Second, value our own legacies. The solution is in our own self-organization for survival and solidarity for our society and for nature. The Global University for Sustainability is organizing its 8th online South-South Forum for Sustainability on June 15th to July 15th this year. We propose the theme as the politics of hope, people's resilience and resistance in catastrophic times. We will be looking at the efforts and struggles of people self-organizing on the ground. One example is the Zapatistas. We will look at how the Zapatistas have organized themselves in the last 3 decades, refusing government aid and focusing their work on self-governance, health, education, and production. The Zapatistas have sent a delegation of 7 members on May 3rd, sailing across the Atlantic on the route in reverse of the colonizers of 500 years ago, to land in Europe in July or August, and to exchange experience on people's efforts and wisdoms. They say, "You brought us destruction, but we are now bringing you hope." The Earth University and the Global University for Sustainability have jointly produced a book in Spanish, English, and Chinese for this occasion. A second example is Fukushima. The world media a month ago talked about Japan's decision to dump radioactive water into the ocean. However, not much focus was put on how every day, yesterday and today and tomorrow, 140 tons of radioactive water is generated. How do you have this 140 tons per day? Because nothing after 10 years and in the coming 50 years can be done to removing the molten fuel inside the damaged number 1 and number 3 reactors. We all must have seen how the roofs of the reactors were blown off in March 2011. But we are not told by the mainstream media of the conditions since then inside the reactors. I have just published a book in Chinese on 10 years after the Fukushima catastrophe. Why is this not a highlight in the mainstream media and not even talked much about in the social media? Because if we probe into the underlying issues, we have to question the whole issue about energy, about profits made by fossil fuel or so-called clean energy conglomerates, and also about the so-called modern cozy lifestyle, which is for a minority of middle class and above. The whole question about science will be brought in, or the superstition about science. To counter science and modernization with all the corresponding political, economic, social, and cultural institutions, shall we return to some of our own legacies before the colonizers came, legacies that are adapted to the contemporary times? A third example, the COVID-19 pandemic. We are concerned about the vaccines being made a public good and to be made available to all, especially in the periphery countries. This I fully support. However, I feel the vaccines should not be the sole solution. There are other ways to counter the pandemic. In China, about 90% of COVID-19 patients were given either as the main or as a supplementary treatment, traditional medicine in the form of capsules or soup. In China, we have a tradition of hundreds of years of dealing with various pandemics. The current treatment formulas come from some medical classics. Likewise, in India, in Africa, in the Amazon, everywhere, there are traditional ways which are sometimes rendered illegitimate by the WHO, FDA, or pharmaceutical companies. But these can and should be explored and practiced rather than being dismissed as backward or unscientific. We need to challenge the Eurocentrism that imposed its superiority with the military, political, and cultural colonizations. Today, the immediate concern is the pandemic, but humanity is seeing a major collapse, which is the climate collapse, together with acute crisis in food and water. We need to look into ourselves to see the strengths and the capacities for change. My third point is we should be regenerating inactive alliances. Before the Social Forum started in 2001, within Asia, we had a large convergence called the PP21, the People's Plan for the 21st Century, that started in 1989 in Minamata, then in 1992 in Bangkok, and continued into 1996 in Kathmandu. Due to various reasons, which was the idea of converging into the World Social Forum processes, it has become active. Together with Muto Ichio, PPSG, ACFORD, and others, we are hoping to reactivate the connections and to once again enter into the stage of history. We meet on the 26th of each month, so you are all welcome to join. Maybe just one last word about China. I believe China's strategy should go away from developmentalism, instead should go inward and to the grassroots, rather than participating in the globalization game in which there are mixed outcomes. Importing raw materials, being the world factory, then exporting the heavily subsidized products, retaining the pollution in a destroyed environment, consuming the most productive prime years of laborers, in order to get US dollars as foreign reserve, and then losing all its value in buying US bonds. And we are also anticipating US seizure in the name of punishing China for US claims about China's human rights or the pandemic. So I think my view is, if China can go for a localized mode of economic, political, social, and cultural practice, for self-sufficiency, for low energy consumption, and for ecological civilization, China can be at peace with itself and with its neighbors. I would go for a China dream, which must not be modeled on the American dream. It should be a dream for people's sovereignty, self-sufficiency, and solidarity with respect for nature. And hopefully, on this basis, the Bandung spirit or the search for socialism can be revived. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chi. I would like to ask you, you shared a couple of dates, conferences, meetups that are going to be taking place the next weeks. If you would be so kind and add them also to the chat for the live audience, and they're going to be communicated in the IPF website, as I'm told. So now I have the honor again to introduce a further speaker, Tarja Cronberg from Finland. She's the chairperson of the Finnish Peace Union. She's a distinguished associate fellow with the SIPRI Foundation. She was a member in the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee and Subcommittee for Security and Defense. And she has worked with the Iran nuclear issue as a chair of the European Parliament's Delegation for Relations with Iran. She's an author of a book, The Nuclear Multilateralism and Iran, Inside the European Negotiations, and another publication, Renegotiating the Nuclear Order. So, Tarja, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to your intervention.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, and I think it was very nice that the previous speaker ended with a sort of hopeful and optimistic view. I will start by reminding you that in the nuclear field, the doomsday clock is 100 seconds to midnight, which is the closest we have ever been to a catastrophe. And not only that, but also that the situation is unpredictable. Last year at this time, all the articles I read said that, well, in the Middle East, we can forget the Palestine-Israel conflict. Now Israel has new relations with its neighbors. And what have we seen last week and the week before? A war between Hamas and Israel. So we are in an unpredictable, very dangerous situation. I would like to follow up Noam Chomsky's discussion on the nuclear weapons. Like was said also, I'm an Iran expert and working on the nuclear order. And I would like to take up some of the solutions, some of the questions relating to international multilateral rules in this field. So I hope you will find these solutions, although they are somewhat bureaucratic and sometimes maybe even technocratic, available to sort of look at the problems. And what I would like to take up, my greatest problem is today, the modernization of nuclear weapons that's actually going on in almost in all 9 nuclear weapon states, but especially on 2 in Asia, China and Russia, and 3 if we count Russia in Europe, the UK, France, and Russia. And this modernization is an euphemism which actually includes a lot of different things. It's an umbrella to ignore the whole thing. And it is about maintenance of the nuclear weapons that we have, but it's also and above all about developing nuclear weapons. And these developments for nuclear weapons, they go today in 2 directions. One is, on the one hand, we're talking about more powerful and faster weapons. The US is currently building a new weapon of mass destruction called GBSD, Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent, designed to replace the existing fleet of Minuteman III missiles. It will be able to travel 6,000 miles, carry warhead 20 times more stronger than in Hiroshima, and the US Air Force has plans to order 600 of these. Based on the Pentagon report, the government will spend about 100 billion to build the weapon. And the question is, of course, what about climate change? What about health and security? The second line is different. It's about reducing the yield of the weapons. And this might sound like a good development, which it is not, because it threatens to lower the threshold for nuclear activity. And so it was in the 2018 US nuclear posture review, which actually asked for development of these low-yield weapons, and the development is currently ongoing. So the nuclear taboo is under transformation, to say so. The preventive power as use of small weapons would make them less catastrophic, maybe, but still catastrophic. And the cost of this development is exorbitant. The best known estimate comes from the US, where the 30-year cost of the programs under nuclear modernization umbrella includes new nuclear-capable bombers, land-based nuclear missiles, and nuclear submarines, is estimated to between 1.2 to 1.7 trillion during 30 years. And this is only the cost of the US programs. Russia and China are expected to follow. But my main point, and the most dangerous part of this development, is that there are no international agreements that can control this new arms race. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, is only limited to horizontal proliferation, to proliferation where new states access nuclear weapons. But this, what is called vertical proliferation, the fact that nuclear weapon state, existing nuclear weapon states access new nuclear weapons, there's no control. There are no limits, and it's only up to the countries themselves to decide what to do. In a way, this is understandable, because at the time the NPT was, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was negotiated in the 60s, the worry was about new states getting nuclear weapons, especially small states, and there were forecasts of 20 to 30, maybe even 40 nuclear weapon states. But today, the threat is actually this vertical proliferation. And what can be done? What is the solution to this question of nuclear weapon states modernizing in quotes their weapons? As mentioned, I have just written a book about renegotiating the nuclear order, which looks at solutions. And first of all, as I mentioned, the NPT was negotiated 50 years ago. And not only has the balance between non-nuclear states and nuclear states been distorted, the non-nuclear states are under tremendous control on all details of moving of fissile material, while the nuclear weapon states are under no control, independently of whether you are one of the P5 who has signed the NPT, or you are outside, like some countries in Asia, North Korea, India, Pakistan. So the question is, and this is one of my solutions, is to try to renegotiate the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty worth the name, that would also not only focus on horizontal proliferation, new states, but also focus on vertical proliferation. Focus on the fact that nuclear weapon states are developing freely, without limits, new weapon systems. A third pillar could be added to this nuclear proliferation treaty. For example, non-state actors, the question of terrorism and failed states, which is also becoming a threat, but no, not such an acute threat that the vertical proliferation. The question, of course, is how to renegotiate the NPT. And it's not easy, I am telling you. It has only been changed once before in 1995, when the treaty was made permanent. The changes in the NPT text requires a very bureaucratic procedure of the board and countries and so forth. But the most interesting thing is that all the P5, the 5 nuclear states that have signed the NPT and that are the main proliferators today in vertical proliferation, have a veto power to any changes in the NPT. So how could this be overcome so that the NPT could become a non-proliferation treaty worth the names? And some authors have rightly pointed out that a walkout of the review process, the NPT, is now has its 51st anniversary in August. Plans for a review process are either taking place or not. We don't know yet. But there's the only theoretical possibility, as long as the widespread security benefits of continued non-proliferation are seen to exist. However, the question today is more precise. It's about whether the dissatisfaction of the slow pace of disarmament will create a political momentum that cannot be contained with detrimental side effects for the
Tarja, can you adjust your camera again, because we only see the upper part of your face? Thank you very much.
Can you see me now? I'm sorry, my computer is turning.
Yes, no worries, it's perfect, thank you.
Okay, so my question today is whether the special combination of the new ban treaty, the current modernization plans of the nuclear weapon states have created this momentum where actually countries could walk out from the NPT review conference and actually promote the renegotiation of the NPT to include also vertical proliferation. This might seem a distant vision. It requires that countries commit to this collectively and actually do an action together concretely at the NPT review conference. But at this moment, the danger is so great. And also on the positive side, I also want to end up with a hopeful comment, is that the ban treaty states, those that have now ratified it, are just beginning to organize. And their first organization is taking place in January. And I think the renegotiating the NPT should be on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarja, for this very comprehensive report on the state of affairs over nuclear non-future. It was nice, yeah. It was very, very, very good to hear you. I will now yet introduce the next speaker, Helmut Scholz, European member of the European Parliament, of the party The Left, as a member of the Left in the European Parliament, and Die Linke in Germany. He's also representing the group of the Left in the European Parliament in the working group on the conference of the future of Europe. I had the chance to speak with you already on the issue, Helmut, and I really look forward to your presentation and your thoughts on security and peace.
Thank you very much, Katharina, and thank you all for having the invitation for this very challenging, interesting, encouraging panel. And very inspiring was also to listen to Noam Chomsky, a brilliant mind, probably we all agree. And after listening to a linguist, let me share a thought on the term geopolitics. It seems to be a discipline where many intelligent people attempt to construct an objective reasoning for those few people who derive their wealth and power and influence from conflict and fear. And having listened to Walden Bello, the distinguished participant of our panel, who from my side ended a little bit very pessimistic, because he spoke that this interest of power, of conflict and fear will lead to war. And the question is not if, but only when and how and where. And in this panel, we all probably are old enough to remember a bipolar world order, and that it could disappear after one leader stepped out of the predominant logic. The 90s of the last century were a period of hope and trust into reason, and manifest in a series of United Nations World Conferences on sustainable development, on human rights, on social development, on women, on our habitat. And there was even a period of hope and peace in the Middle East, rewarded by Nobel Prizes for Sharon, Begin, and Arafat. We should not forget that. And the beautiful words of the 90s, unfortunately, did not deliver for too many people in the world with regard to ending poverty, providing food, providing shelter. Will things even be better was a question. And that was a discussion about to which extreme groups were offering very often cheap and popular answers. So faith-based rebellion campaigns in the Middle East and South Asia were armed by cunning people aiming to profit from conflict. And they cultivated the re-emergence of enemy Islamists to be able to make use again of the well-established conflict rhetoric from the Cold War period. So remember George W. Bush, his conflict campaign won against Al Gore's climate protection campaign. That was 20 years ago. The ghosts that had been called for at that time are still among us. The monstrous deeds of men claiming to fight a faith-based war for an Islamic State shocked me and probably all of us. For many regions in Africa, in West Asia, in Central Asia, and in South Asia, there's no peace right now while we are talking. The armed groups abuse religion as legitimation for their power struggle. And their arms are bought and put in and produced by the United States, European countries, Russia, China. Christian fundamentalists and so-called evangelicals have been calling for conflict and capitalized on conflict as well. They supported Trump and his ideological strategy, and they will be a very decisive force in the United States election campaigns to come, not only the one who has been just changed a little bit the narrative. They supported also Bolsonaro. They are flooding the TV screens in Latin America and Africa, and unfortunately also in a growing measure in Europe, and they are determining by a lot the social media. The aggression from religious groups on both sides in the Israel-Palestine conflict is also reaching new peaks, despite the reach still stand in the conflict there for the last 20 hours. The religious language of distinguishing between good and evil has become so ever present in US media again that people seem to mix it up with a scientific term. That brings me back to geopolitics. In the United States, media, Russia and China are empires of the evil, as bad as it could be in an old Hollywood movie. When Biden calls Putin a killer just after coming to, or the days he came into power, many Americans applauded. Remember, having a rival means you have to invest into arms, and your population will have to accept your domestic surveillance measures. During the last 8 years, the arrival of a new enemy has been messaged into the media, China. And that is a lot of the discussion today in this panel, and we have listened to the analysis from the distinguished participants in the panel, and that the West-China conflict could be a real showdown. Here I agree. The people benefiting from being powerful in the hegemonic nation state seriously wish to slow down the rise of China as an economic power. And in China, at the same time, neither the government of Xi Jinping nor the new Chinese billionaires and millionaires, not the rather nationalistic population, will ever make a kowtow again. And we should not forget in this moment that there was in Shanghai the Bund, where there was a small garden, and the garden entry was named with forbidden for dogs and Chinese. And that is one issue which we have to understand when we are talking about the question of, will this lead to a new era of substitute conflicts from a Western perspective, including the United States, the European Union, Australia, and maybe also Japan, new alliances has hastily been created with India to counterbalance agreements made by China with nations in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Henry Kissinger just recently warned publicly of the risk on an armed conflict between technologically leading nations such as the United States and China, and the possible application of new technologies in artificial intelligence, supercomputing, robotics, etc. So the public debate in the European Union, in Europe maybe at all, and the United States is actively being inspired to fear this emerging development in China and its capabilities in this question of technology and possessing the most modern forms of industrial potential. And I can tell you that this has also reached the debates in the European Parliament. Very few years ago, after desperately asking for Chinese investments after the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, so-called defense legislation is being put together to fight off Chinese investments, in particular in infrastructure and high tech in Europe, not to mention Trump and his launch of a trade war against China. And besides also a trade war between US and the European Union. So the question is very much about what and should be done that the subjects of the society's development of the modern times of today are made the real decisive power in determining in which way the policies are to be developed. That means the citizens. And that leads me to the question that we have, for example, in the European Union just now, the issue of unleashing or starting a conference on the future of Europe, analyzing what is the state of play of the European integration and what should be done to feed the real interest of these citizens. And that leads me to the question, having listened to the very important question of nuclear disarmament, the danger of arms races again, and the conflicts in the areas, including in the Southeast Asia Sea. Southeast Asia Sea, yes. We have to change the narrative in the common foreign and security policy at all, fundamentally. Let's give me 3 examples. And I thank Tarja for remembering us that the doomsday clock is just some milliseconds to midnight. I would say only the COVID-19 crisis has stopped that we have already midnight. So that is not helping anything, but we have still some milliseconds for reaching the aim, and that leads me that the melting permafrost soil in the northern regions of our globe, that the burning forests, rainforests in a lot of countries around the equator, that the terrible water shortage in African countries, look to the picture from Madagascar these days, should be the final signal and the final appeal to all of us to say this is about our security, because there will be, besides the question of power influence and power conflict, the question that there will be wars on water, there will be wars on food, and there will be war on having a home not directly endangered by the climate change. And that leads us to the question, yes, we have to understand that the financial and economic crises of yesterday and today, that the political and ideological crisis of yesterday and today are linked to this question that we have to cooperate, whatever it costs, to deal and tackle with these global challenges. And that is a value, and that is the political signal I want to say, that here we have to rethink how international politics is run and how we are concentrating our abilities for economic and political reason to deal with issues. Trump has done a lot to poison the atmosphere in international relations. He is a prototype of a narcissistic personality aiming to destroy in order to acclaim the position of a savior. He planted the seed of aggression and mistrust in both in economic and diplomatic relations. And he is not gone. With midterm elections coming up in 2022, the majority of the Republican Party pays tribute to him, and a man hoping to be led back into power. And that is linked to the question I wanted to raise to us. Are we able to change this narrative? How to introduce new ways of development? For example, in the European Parliament, we have tried to initiate a legislative resolution on the due diligence supply chain. That means that we are rethinking in which way the economic development must be shaped, in which way the supply and value chains are to be shaped for meeting the interests and the needs of the common people and the citizens. And that is true for the people in the European Union, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, in all Asian countries, that is in Africa. And maybe there's a huge hope that we are also looking that 2.3 billion people in Africa in 2050 are a value, and then not a value, but a determining factor for influencing the way of how the other global powers have to react to this development. And maybe the wisdom of African people should be integrated in our political analysis for dealing what is the world development about. And that leads me to the final remark. We are discussing in the European Union just now the not really determined already fully strategic autonomy narrative. What does it mean? What does it mean for the European Union to be autonomous from other countries? Does it mean we will also want to be a global power like the United States or China or the Russian Federation in a way of that we want to have a place in the world determining the development of others? I think that would be a wrong approach. We have to understand that the strategic autonomy of the European Union should be to become a factor and a subject in the international politics who is striving for a rule-based multilateral world order, both in political and economic terms, and give other nations, other countries a chance to participate in determining in which way this multilateral order and its rules should be worked out and should be implemented. And here, I thank you very much that we had the chance to see that our panel is dealing with the challenge, and maybe the concept from the Chinese Tianxia, all under heaven, is leading that we have to understand we are all under heaven. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helmut. That you have also received the question in the chat. In case you want to answer it directly. I will proceed. We're running a little bit tight on schedule, so I will proceed now introducing the next speaker again. So Dr. Nguyen, T. Ngoc, please, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Very, very sorry if I didn't do so. I did my best. The floor is yours. I will introduce you now briefly. Dr. Ngoc is a researcher on the Institute of Foreign Policy and Strategic Studies. Her experience is focused on the ASEAN, relationship between the ASEAN and external partners, non-traditional security issues from Southeast Asia. Thank you very much for being here. Open your mic.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair and distinguished panelists. It is really a great pleasure for me to join this panel. And I learned a lot from previous presentations. My presentation will focus on security in Asia Pacific. And just a moment, I would like to share my screen with you so that you can see the slide. Okay, I hope that you can see the slides now, right?
Yes.
Please let me know if you see it.
Yes, we can see them.
Okay. Actually, because of the time restraint, I would like to be fast brief. And here is the content of my presentation. Actually, I will focus on some issues in Asia Pacific security, and then some points about implications for Asia Europe security, and some of my recommendations what should be done. Very briefly about regional context in Asia Pacific, because actually previous panelists mentioned quite a lot about it. So I would like to highlight 3 points, 3 factors that have direct implications to regional security in Asia Pacific. First one is the intensification of major powers competition, in particularly US-China relations and US-Russia relations. Of course, in terms of Asia Pacific, US-China relations is the main factor having impact on regional security. Second factor is the deterioration of multilateralism and international law. Actually, over the recent years, we witnessed quite a lot of violation of international law, and in the region we made a lot of efforts to uphold international law, but so far these efforts has not been so successful. Third point is about complexity of conventional and non-conventional security challenges in the region. Now I will move on to the key issues in regional security. And actually, in this part, I would like to divide into 2 groups of security challenges. One is conventional, and the second group is non-conventional security issues. Among conventional security issues, I would like to highlight the first group is territorial disputes, and the second is the issues of arms control. And as you can see on the screen, over recent years, we can see the escalation of tension around different territorial disputes in the region, especially the disputes between India and China and the South China Sea. Of course, in the region, there are also other disputes which are in a smaller scale, but anyway, all of them can be potential flashpoint in the near future. Second point is about arms control. I would like to highlight the nuclear issue in North Korea. So here is some illustration about the territorial disputes in the region. As you can see, China-India dispute, the Taiwan issue, so on and so forth. And about North Korea, actually, there is a change in the dynamics of this issue, because in 2018 and in 2019, we made some efforts to to settle this issue, and 2 of 10 ASEAN countries managed to organize 2 summits between North Korea and the United States. We try to facilitate the dialogue between these 2 countries so that the arms control can be improved in the region. But unfortunately, since last year and until today, North Korea, restart their design, testing, and develop weapons. I think it's really a very nervous and anxious tendency in the region. In terms of conventional security issues in the region, I would like to focus on the South China Sea issue. Actually, previous panelists mentioned it and give a lot of observation, very precious points about it. But in this part, I would like to highlight, the dynamism of this issue, and I see it like a very dangerous tendency in the way China's behavior in this issue. As you can see here, I want to share with you the timeline. Of course, South China Sea issue traced back long time ago, many decades ago. But along with the China's rise, we can see that China has become more and more assertive in this issue in South China Sea. During the years from 2013 to 2018, China accelerated and then declared that China completed reclamation in South China Sea. And by doing so, China, they strengthened their presence and control on the ground in South China Sea. And in 2016, upon the release of permanent Tarja award, China rejected all the decisions of international court. And then in 2017, when the reclamation is would be shortly finished, then China proposed to restart the COC, the Code of Conduct negotiation with ASEAN countries. But actually, it is not. I don't think that it is an intention to uphold international law in the region, but because we can see that actually on the ground, scholars witness that China is carrying out like 3 warfares in South China Sea. 3 warfares including public opinion, psychological and legal warfares in this region. Some evidence for it we can see in China's behavior. For instance, in 2019, it is the Vanguard Bank incident in Vietnam. In 2020, China carried out 35 drills in the South China Sea, which are quite large scale. And this year, China passed Coast Guard law and sent many ships to Philippines. So we can see that here there is an increasing assertiveness made by China in this dispute. How about the response of other countries to China's assertiveness? Actually, China's policy made other countries feel very concerned, and that's why in 2020, many countries filed notables to the United Nations to reject China's sweeping claims in South China Sea, including Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Australia, US, France, UK, and Germany. And freedom of navigation operation, or we call it FONA, was carried out by the United States, France, and UK in South China Sea. And many countries and also organizations call for upholding of international law, particularly the UNCLOS 982. And of course, all of the countries call for peaceful resolution of this dispute. So by highlighting the South China Sea issue, I would like to mention that it's really can become a potential hotspot in this region. Although so far there is no armed conflict in South China Sea, but if we cannot manage, if we cannot control, if we cannot manage the conflict, the miscalculation between claimants, then it would be very, very dangerous for all the countries. And it's not only about Asia Pacific, it's also about the international trade routes, and it's also about the competition between major powers. If the competition between major powers become more and more complicated and intensified, then it would be bad, and it would not provide us with a peaceful environment for development. Now I would like to move on to some non-conventional security issues. And here, as you can see, I would like to highlight 5 issues that I think they have a lot of impacts on people's life in Asia Pacific. First one, pandemic. Second, water security. Third one, climate change. Fourth one, cyber security. And the fifth one, terrorism and extremism. You know, I understand the time refrain, so I would be very briefly about all these points. I think there's no need to talk more about pandemic. We can see, you know, a lot of casualties and death caused by it. The climate change, here are some pictures showing how climate change caused a lot of natural disasters and extreme weather, which you know, damage people's life in Asia Pacific. Here are some pictures about flood in China, Vietnam, and the landslides in Vietnam last year. At this point, I would like to focus on the most burning issues, I think, in the region now. It is the Mekong issue. You know, here is the map of Mekong Delta. And I think maybe many of you are quite familiar with Mekong issue. You know, actually, because of a lot of dams built on upstream, you can see here the points showing a lot of dams built and are being built in the upstream and mainstream of Mekong Delta. All these dams led to, you know, reduction, decrease of water level, change of biodiversity, change of environment, and force local people to change their livelihood. And I think along with the dams, climate change also is a very, you know, a very burning issue in Mekong Delta. I just want to give you some point showing that, you know, as time goes by, climate change causes severe drought, soil intrusion, and the precipitation and also the water level in Mekong become less and less along the time. So, you know, it's really affects food security, livelihood, economy, environment, health of people in the Mekong Delta. And we think that it is dangerous because, you know, the severe issue comes also at the time of pandemic. I think for this time, it is very critical for us to foster economic recovery and healthcare and sustainable development for this region. But with all these challenges caused by climate change and the hydropower development, I think the situation would become worse and worse. Here are some pictures showing the drought and how crop was damaged by climate change and the hydropower dams. Actually, another dynamism in this issue is the, you know, there are a lot of multilateral mechanisms working in Mekong sub-region. The Mekong River Commission, AEPF, and you know, many external partners also initiated different mechanisms to work with countries in the sub-region. As you can see, the Mekong Lankan Corporation launched by China, and then the Mekong Japan initiative, which Japan would like to incorporate the elements of free and open Indo-Pacific strategy to the Mekong. Republic of Korea also initiated the Mekong and Han River Declaration in 2019, and just last year, the United States upgraded Lower Mekong Initiative to Mekong-US Partnership. And you know, although there are a lot of multilateral mechanisms in this region, so far, in my personal observation, there hasn't been any significant improvement of the situation in the sub-region. So I think maybe for the people's organization, we should be more active in this issue so that we can improve the people's life in this region. Very briefly about the implications for Asia-Europe security. So when I look at the security challenges in Asia and Europe, I can see that there are 4 implications. First of all, it is the escalation of tension and the trust issue. The second, it is danger to human security. And of course, it is the people's life quality. Third one is the hindrance to post-COVID-19 economic recovery. And the fourth one, it is the impacts on international law. I think security of Asia and Europe has become more and more intertwined. If we look at the 3 key points on this screen, right, you can see that there are a lot of conversions in security challenges between the 2 regions. So the last point is my recommendation. I think maybe we should have actions cooperation in all the 3 levels, national, regional, and inter-regional level. Here I would like to highlight 4 points that I think we should activate in the near future. First of all, to foster constructive dialogues between people's organizations and state agencies in policy making. Second, we need to raise awareness of people about security challenges and the undivided security of the connection between Asian and European security. The third one, we need to enhance cooperation between people's organizations and multilateral mechanisms in both regions. As you may know, in Southeast Asia, we have ASEAN-led mechanisms. So actually, I think ASEAN is quite active in working with people's organizations, and we hope that in Europe, you also have regional mechanism which can help people to improve their life and security. And the last point, it is a stronger call for international law and multilateralism based on UN Charter. So in conclusion, I think peace movement and cooperation are critical for people's life at present and in the near future. We need to strengthen multilateralism and international law. Thanks so much for your attention. I'd like to raise a voice for one piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ngoc. Thank you very much. This was very enlightening as well. I'm really I feel the whole panel has been majestic, coming out of here with a lot of ideas. I have the honor now to introduce the last speaker for today. Professor Chenoy from India is a retired university professor and former dean of the School of International Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Professor Chenoy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And before I start, on behalf of AEPF and all of us here, I want to convey our solidarity to the Palestinians in Gaza and Jerusalem and West Bank, and also condemn Israel's unilateral oppression and bombardment. What I'm going to speak on fine-tunes with the speakers before, and I will be very brief. This is about international geopolitics and militarization. And researchers, the last 15 have shown that in the last 2 years, 15 instances of how peace and security situation has deteriorated in Asia and Europe, just in 2 years. And furthermore, outside Europe and Asia, there are many other instances. The renewed rivalry and hostility between the US on one hand and Russia and China on the other has also global impacts in significant ways. Now, my argument is that most of these deteriorations are a consequence of militarized geopolitics, militarized worldviews and ideologies, and militarized policies that actually intertwine and intersect with national, domestic, and local politics, as well as social relations. And this militarization has direct consequences on the existential aspects of our lives, whether it's climate change, whether it is defense and nuclear spending or projects, on violent conflicts, and on interpersonal and social relations. And I have 6 points very quickly to show this. 1, data from armed conflict locations and data sites show that proxy wars in the global south declined only for 1 decade, and that is between 1990 and around 2001 or 2, but revived dramatically as globalization progressed in the last 2 decades. Great powers, whether it was USA, Russia, and even regional powers, emerging powers, they have been intervening in most local conflicts. The conflicts in West Asia, in Indo-Pacific, see multiple regional powers and renewed militarization. And the US, China, and Russia rivalry is already increasing the militarization in local disputes as well as in defense expenditures. Point 2, the material aspects of geopolitics and militarization is linked with defense expenditures. Global military expenditures, as we just heard, is over $2 trillion, and that did not decrease in any way, even in the midst of the second or first wave of COVID-19 pandemic. 3, there has been no clear agreement between nuclear states on a reduction and ban on nuclear weapons. Paradigms of realism, deterrence, nuclear taboo influence policy and practice of both major and aspiring powers. 4th, the military has a huge carbon bootprint. Destruction from wars, military exercises in the sea, land, and air. Military bases are great consumers and wasters. And the global carbon footprint is greater, for example, than all of Italy's carbon footprint. Militaries are generally exempt from carbon reduction targets, so the data is poor, and there's a huge misuse of money and scientific knowledge. 5, militarization is linked with greater violence in interpersonal relations, whether it is gender relations, sexual violence against women, vigilantes, gun violence. It reinforces patriarchy, and there is a backlash on women world over on account of this militarized mindset. 6, civilian militarism, I believe, is the most dangerous. It hollows out democracies and increases authoritarian tendencies. Much of the global south, from Brazil, Ethiopia, India, Pakistan, Philippines, etc., have right-wing civilian militarized governments. These lionize militarist symbols, signs, and values and make it fundamental to the idea of nation and nationalism. If you question this, there is a militarized response to dissent and peace and climate activists, to progressive thinkers, and to minority communities who then are excluded from the frame of the nation state and outside the rule of law. So there's a free-for-all for them from either the state or non-state actors. These regimes flourish with this globalized, militarized geopolitics. I just want to give 2 examples before I conclude. One is we've already seen vaccine nationalism, and we've had sessions on it. But Putin, when he has promoted the Russian vaccine, has argued repeatedly that Sputnik 5 vaccine is as effective as the AK-47 Kalashnikov rifle. Second example, Colombia, Guatemala, Honduras, Philippines. In these states and many others, Hundreds of climate activists have been killed. And in Philippines alone, for example, 114 environmental activists have been killed under the Duterte regime on the pretext of national security. In India, activists are called anti-national if they dissent under national security laws, militarized national security laws. In one village, Kudankulam village, where villagers protested against a nuclear plant, 2011 onwards, 9,000 cases of sedition were slapped on the villagers, which continue to date. But my last and my concluding point is that there is also hope and resistance. Civil society, international solidarity, the women's and peace movements, the social justice movements intersect now and link with social and peace movements, and it is happening every day. The kind of support against a Myanmar coup, the kind of international support for Palestine is dramatically changed, and these regimes and militarization is getting delegitimized. So to ensure peace and justice and endorse what other speakers before me have said, I would argue stop this militarization, whether in geopolitics and nuclear issues or in the personal and public and political. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Professor Chenoy, and thank you for keeping the time. As I'm sure most of you have noticed, we're a little bit back in schedule. I will now give the moderation back to Cuong, who will try to pick up some questions from the audience and read them aloud.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Thank you very much for very excellent speech of our respected speaker. And we have a lot of questions here. Luckily, some of them have already been answered in the Q&A box. And as I said before, due to the time constraint, I know that we cannot have enough time for all the questions. But I want to raise some question, in general question for our respected speaker. I would like all the speakers will make a response to the question, to this question. There are three very important questions I want to raise here. I want to gather here. The first question, the United Nations and other major institutions have not played a significant role in the international peace process. Do you think that in the future, the United Nations and other regional bodies will be able to stem the tide of conflict? I mean, the role of the UN and other regional bodies. The second question, what is the role of the EU in the conflict between the US and China escalate into full-scale war or even the Cold War? Is the EU exerting any effort right now to mediate the tension between the two? And another question, I think that Chenoy has some response to this. My question, do you think CSO plays the role for the settlement of the Kashmir issue between Pakistan and India in the future? I think that it should be the role of CSO in the settlement of conflict and tension in the world. Now, I would like to hear from all the speakers. First, and I would like each speaker try to keep it 2 minutes for your response. Mr. Nguyen Bello, first, please.
Well, yes, thank you very much for the question. I think the on the question of the United Nations, I think UN institutional reform is really very important to be able to make the UN a more effective force for global peace. I think reform of the Security Council is really important. And as you can see, the control of big powers over the Security Council in terms of being able to block very, very important initiatives that would promote world peace and, you know, would promote a peaceful solution to problems is very stark. We have just seen how, again, with respect to the Hamas-Israel issue, you know, the U.S. Played a blocking role in the Security Council, was in fact pushing to try to resolve this informally out of the institutions of the UN. So that's the first thing. On the EU, I think our friends from the EU could answer that better. The only thing I would add is I think, you know, that the alliance between the EU and the US has become looser in the last several years. And I would just like to say that the Trump administration's basically being quite dismissive and in fact even very insulting to the EU, to countries like Germany, for instance, has taken its toll. And one of the things you can see now is, for instance, although the Biden administration has promoted saying that, okay, let's waive the TRIPS, let's have the TRIPS waiver and allow the export of technological processes and patents to developing countries. The EU, as far as I know, is still blocking it. So what used to be an automatic thing like, that strong alliance between Western countries, I think is becoming less and less, it's becoming weaker and weaker. The United States can no longer automatically depend on the EU to support its initiatives.
Thank you very much, Professor Bello. Now, Professor Lo Kinchi, can you make some response?
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, well, thank you for the questions. First of all, on the first question about the UN, there have been calls for reform of the UN for decades. And I think, we have to look into the question of why all these calls have been so much in vain. And there are also a lot of fingers pointed at the powers of the IMF and the World Bank, etc. And we also have to ask the question, why is it that they still assert so much power? On the question about the China and Europe and the EU, recently then there's this these days, there's the pact with China on investment, etc., has been frozen, so-called from Europe. And I've seen very interesting comments about this, because some people, actually maybe more on the left, welcomed this. Not because it is a punishment of China, but because all these pressures from the United States, from Europe, from other, unfriendly nations would compel China to go back, to go inward. And so we see that there has been this state strategy from China to say that we will now go for both internal circulation and external circulation. What this means actually is that because it's compelled by a lot of hostilities from outside, China cannot continue with this path of so-called peaceful development in terms of industrialization, exporting its products, or abiding by WTO prescriptions. So in a way, China's response has been rather passive because of all these unfriendly forces and now exerting the pressure on China. Then the official strategy is that we will also go for internal circulation. I think for us, for those of us proposing more localizations and more self-sufficiency, then we feel that this should be turned into an active policy strategy rather than being a passive one. But then I think the key question is whether it is external circulation or internal circulation. The question is, would the logic be the logic of capital? And so I think that is one of the crucial issues. And I feel that we should sometimes go beyond analyzing the world order in terms of nation states, because for example, if we look at China, there are so many different forces, and there are also a lot of forces within China fighting for better ecology, better environment, for more justice and equalities, and for better conditions for the poor, for the workers, for the peasants. So I feel that we should be taking a subaltern perspective, consciously placing ourselves on the margins of society, whether that is China or India or Brazil or the United States, so that we learn from the efforts and the wisdoms of those on the margin, the women, the indigenous, the peasants, and so I feel that while we are talking about peace and security, and very often the actors become the states or the United Nations, I feel that we should also focus on questions about community organizing, how the communities can recover the management of the commons, and also be able to forge a much better world than the one that we have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimchi. Now I would like to invite Tarja Cronberg. Tarja?
Thank you. Yes, on your first question about the UN, I agree that the question is about the Security Council, and the UN's role, if you look at all the conflict situations in the world today, it doesn't have a very good record. And the reason is the veto power or the P5 in the Security Council. And as these 5 also happen to be the 5 nuclear weapon states that actually have the power within the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the nuclear order, it is essential that their power be somehow changed, and the veto, the exclusion of the veto power. Right after Hiroshima, there were a lot of indications that this veto power should be cancelled in order to sort of have reasonable solutions. On the second question, I have followed the EU mediation capacity for a long time, also as a European Parliament member and Iran delegation member. First of all, it's not looser. The transatlantic link is still strong, but there's some hesitation, and this hesitation is on state level and it's on a personal level. And the EU is not a good mediator. In the Iran deal, now during Trump maximum pressure and also before, the EU can have a role of a facilitator, the table and so forth, but not actual mediator. And in the question of China, especially China-US relations, I can't see a role for the EU. It has to be direct contact between the Chinese and the US, and EU playing a role in mediation there, I think the US will always pressure the EU, and so it will be an unbalanced negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarja. And I would like to invite MEP Helmut. I think that what we expect from you is the question about the EU, about the role of the EU. Helmut, please.
Yeah, thank you. Probably I have to answer this question on the EU, I guess, and I want to be very frank. Currently, the EU is taking the place of a closer cooperation again with the United States and strengthening the transatlantic cooperation, vice versa, all the emerging other questions and issues in a global understanding. But of course, we have to determine very clearly who is the EU. So the EU are member states with different interests. And we should have a look on the changes in the EU decision-making structure. We have a lot now powerful and influential partners from the Central and East European countries, which are bringing into the foreign and security policy of the European Union the experience of confrontation with the Russian Federation from the past, with the cultural background, etc. So they are influencing the more pro-transatlantic cooperation than maybe it has been before by the Central and more Western European states when they have determined very much the foreign security policy of the European Union. And that is true also of the European Parliament. So for the momentum, I don't see a very, how to say it, ambitious, autonomous strategy from the European Union towards China. No, they are fearing the economic power of China, and in this inability to rethink their own industrial economic policies, the social policies, and by that gaining the support from citizens all over Europe, they are leaning more to cooperating with the United States. So for the momentum, I would say the mediator role of the European Union should be and must be to to strive for implementing the different challenges in an international sphere. So the sustainable development of all our societies, the question of tackling, for example, the loss of biodiversity, climate change issues, rethinking of energy politics, which is linked then, of course, also to rethink the relationship with China and the United States in turning the focus, the paradigm into that direction. That leads me to the question also of the vaccination, because I saw there has been a question on the German role in the patent waiver and vaccination issue. The problem here is that Germany is a patent holder of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. And that is determining the role of Germany, vice versa, the United States again. So they want to be a stronger economic partner in this relationship. That's why Germany is resisting to agree to the patent waiver. We are striving very much in the European Parliament for going into this direction. We are just 2 days ago voting in the European Parliament, and we managed that the majority of the Parliament, the plenary, has voted for a waiver of vaccines. We have to stabilize this voting in the forthcoming resolution voting on the 7th of June. And I hope that by that we are influencing also the role of the European Union in the WTO, in the WHO, etc., to be in solidarity with all the citizens in the global south, and here to play a positive role as European Union as a mediator. And yes, I saw another question. The ambitious autonomous policy by the EU towards China is not ambitious, and unfortunately they are too defensive in this way, instead of thinking, yes, we have certain interests, we have certain values, we have certain abilities to reshape the cooperation with China, and that means also to overcome the stalemate in the bilateral parliamentarian exchanges, which is stopped at all for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ngoc, I would like to make a very short answer. about a question on ASEAN's role in the settlement of the South China Sea issue. Very short, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Cuong. Actually, I wrote my answer already. But anyway, I understand that many people complain about ASEAN's principle of non-interference, but I think that we cannot have a peaceful resolution for South China Sea issue and other disputes in the region without ASEAN, because of China's ambition to dominate in the region. And I think ASEAN could raise a voice of international law, of peaceful resolution, of no use of force, and it is very important, given that we are trying to recover from the pandemic, and we are trying to foster sustainable growth and development in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Professor Chenoy, would you like to make some responses?
Just response to the one comment which said that on civil society organizations and India, Pakistan and Kashmir relations. Well, civil society has a long tradition in India and Pakistan in trying to forge peace, on putting pressure on their governments for better Pakistan-India relations, for better Pakistan-India-China relations. But with the rise of this right-wing fundamentalism in both India and Pakistan, peace is anti-national. To talk of peace, you can be charged with sedition. Even a major opposition leader who made a comment on Pakistan and used this aphorism G, he was charged with sedition. So this is the situation, but civil society organizations will not give up. They will keep pushing for peace because this is what they do, this is what they believe in. And international civil society are a big support in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anu. Thank you very much, our respected speaker and participant. And sorry for not being able to respond to all questions. But I hope that we will have more chances to talk about this, to hear about this, especially about the US, China, and Russia in our upcoming workshop on major power policy, in which open in 20 minutes. And now I would like to invite Tina Ambro, a coordinator for Asia of the International Organizing Committee of the AEPF, founding coordinator of the Nuclear Free Philippines, co-convener of the Stop the War Coalition, to deliver a closing remark to the plenary. Tina, the floor is yours. Hello, Tina. Turn on, unmute. Please unmute. Unmute yourself. Tina, please unmute yourself.
Yes, I did. Just a while, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. On behalf of the AEPF, allow me to thank our distinguished panel of speakers who shared with us their precious insights and recommendations, especially the legendary Noam Chomsky, known for his tireless commitment to peace and his incisive critique of US foreign policy and US imperialism. And allow me to thank the peace movements that organized this plenary, the Japan Council of Atomic Weapons and Hydrogen Bombs, and the Hibakusha's nuclear survivors in Japan. They have campaigned against nuclear weapons and testing with the survivors from Marshall Islands and other places. The Vietnam Peace and Development Foundation, which campaigns with the survivors of Agent Orange for the abolition of chemical warfare. and the International Peace Bureau, a Nobel Prize recipient, that hosts the Secretariat of the Global Network for the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, called Abolition, and has worked with other movements for the TPNW, or the Nuclear Ban Treaty. IPB has also enabled the establishment of a global campaign on military spending, a permanent year-round campaign to tackle the global issue of excessive military spending, a campaign that works with youth groups of major trade federations, because this money could be spent on life-affirming human needs like free and universal vaccines, decent essential services for all, and for climate justice programs. These peace movements I have mentioned work together with Stop the War, IID, Korea Peace Appeal Campaign, to wage the nuclear disarmament campaign, and the campaign to slash military spending of the AEPF Peace and Security Cluster. Noam Chomsky and some Nobel Prize winners have stated that indeed nuclear annihilation remains a major threat to the survival of our species, aside from the major threats like the pandemic and climate change. Since the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, as mentioned earlier, has set the doomsday clock last year to 100 seconds to midnight. Therefore, immediate moves toward nuclear disarmament must be forced into the world's agenda. And Walden advocated that our first imperative is to revitalize our efforts to demilitarize and to denuclearize the Indo-Pacific region in the immediate future. Friends, the AEPF has critically engaged the ASEM, whose countries in Asia are China, Japan, and India, and the ASEAN, and in Europe, the NATO and the nuclear power countries like Russia. And a cornerstone of its work is holding people's forums like this every 2 years. And its work is enabling dynamic movements in Asia and Europe, including progressive scholars and parliamentarians, to focusing and reflecting on how to develop urgent advocacies and significant alternatives that could be disseminated through the social and mainstream media to generate broad public awareness, raising and support, so that we can develop and exercise the power of collective action in different forms at various fronts and arenas at the local, national, and global level. Because we are aware that there will only be changes in national and global policies only when we have strong social movements that embrace the fight for peace, the fight for social, economic, and climate justice, and for system change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. Thank you everybody, and see you in the next 15 minutes for the workshop on major power policy. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks so much. I enjoy very much. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.